For the last 100 years, the United States and Russia have been some of the biggest powers on the planet. They each worked to develop the best technology and the best weapons, and it wasn't long before they began to realize that the material world wasn't all there was to explore. That's because people in every nation were discovering mind-bending, earth-shattering phenomena that just couldn't be explained within any established scientific theories. Telepathy, ESP, mind reading, why were people having these strange experiences? What projects were developed to understand them? And if their secrets could be unlocked, would that also unlock the secrets of the human body and the universe? Sounds like a pretty big goal, but behind closed doors, that's just what the governments of the world alongside private companies have been figuring out. From plant and animal mind-reading studies to telepathic abilities that most people would call superpowers. Want to hear what's really been discovered about the human mind that isn't supposed to be real? Join me, Rob Counts, for a metaphysical show that's out of this world. And a quick reminder to like and subscribe to the Metaphysical channel to make sure you don't miss out on any updates or content drops. All your support lets us keep making this content. So thanks a lot for watching, for wearing the Metaphysical merch I designed, and for drinking our Metaphysical coffee. It'll get you through your own long nights of research, that's for sure. Now, Cleve Backster served in the Navy during World War II. He was part of the Army's Counterintelligence Corps, specializing in hypno and narco interrogation, aka truth serums. In 1948, he joined the CIA and founded the agency's polygraph program. You know, lie detectors. A few years later, he even opened his own Backster School of Lie Detection, where he taught NYPD detectives and FBI agents. So for a guy with such a serious background, why is Cleve Backster now known as the Plant Whisperer? If you think that sounds ridiculous, just wait, because what he found when he watered an office plant one day changed everything we now know about the potentials of mind reading. In February of 1966, Backster went to water a Dracaena messengiana, or a dragon pot plant. It suddenly occurred to him to attach the electrode from his lie detector to each side of a leaf. When he did, and he watered the plant, the polygraph's tracing lines went down instead of up. Why was that a big deal? It was the same kind of line that comes from a human when they're happy. Shockingly, Backster had discovered that plants have emotions. Now, don't shoot the messenger, vegans. I'm just here to tell you what I found. The research didn't stop there. He had to know more, of course, and he attached the plant to a lie detector again and thought about what experiment to do next. How about burning a leaf? Well, before he could actually light a match and test it out, the polygraph's line shot upward like the plant was afraid. Over years of research, Backster found that plants are almost like pets. They're happy when their caretakers are around and stressed when people argue. In fact, they don't do well at all in hospital psych wards where there's a lot of emotional stress. One of the weirdest things he found was that this mind reading doesn't seem to depend on normal distances, and it can't be blocked. His team tried using a Faraday cage, a screen cage, and lead-lined containers to block whatever signal was being received, but it still worked. Backster found that this ability seems not to fall within our electrodynamic spectrum. So what does that mean? Is there some kind of information traveling in another dimension? And what are the implications if distance doesn't matter in mind reading? I'll get back to that soon, because the militaries of the world had a lot of interest in that, if it were true. For one, you have to remember that this guy's background was CIA interrogation. Get this, he discovered that if someone were murdered in the presence of a plant, the plant could essentially act as a witness. If it saw the murderer again, then the lie detector would show great agitation from the plant. I mean, I've heard this happening when a plant witnessed the murder of another plant, but what about human murderers? When a journalist spoke to Backster, he wrote, quote, "Some of the possible applications of the phenomena in medical diagnosis, criminal investigation, and other fields are so fantastic, he asked me not to repeat them here. What do you suppose he has discovered?" Plant telepathy. But what about more advanced biological creatures? As a matter of fact, it exists there too. Around 1960, the Soviets heard that the US had conducted sub-to-shore telepathy experiments with the US Navy submarine, the Nautilus, at the North Pole. So the Soviets decided to research this too and see if they could communicate between a submarine and land. These Soviet telepathy experiments used rabbits, and they opened up a huge can of worms in international warfare that went way beyond bombs and right into the human mind. The Soviets took a mother rabbit who'd just given birth and implanted electrodes deep inside her brain. She was kept on shore while her newborn babies were taken out to sea in a submarine. The Soviets saw that each synchronized time when they intentionally butchered a baby rabbit, yeah, Soviets suck, there was a sharp reaction in the mother rabbit's brain that was recorded by the electrodes. Somehow communication had taken place between the rabbit and stolen babies across space and time. Now think about it, radio waves pretty much can't penetrate water. At the time, there was no known method of a submerged submarine maintaining contact with the shore. How did the Soviets' rabbit do it? And how did the US Nautilus do it at the North Pole? Now, I found something I haven't seen anyone else talk about. Most people think the Nautilus story is a hoax, but I hunted down the original reports from the 1940s about the Nautilus and telepathy, and I found an article headline, "Telepathy will be of service in war, business," predicts scientists visiting here. Today, it's claimed that the telepathy experiments aboard the Nautilus were a rumor and not true, even if the rumor sparked real Soviet telepathy research. But I found more. This article documented how the British scientist and Arctic explorer Sir Hubert Wilkins wrote a book with Hollywood writer Harold Sherman about their extensive telepathic experiments. I'll explain. See, Wilkins was a famous military officer who made Arctic expeditions. In fact, he attempted to be the first one to cross under the North Pole in a submarine. But Wilkins was reportedly an ESP skeptic. His co-worker Sherman, meanwhile, had long been interested in telepathy. So, in 1937, while Wilkins was off searching the Arctic regions for a party of lost Russian flyers, Sherman was back in New York, about 3,000 miles away, and he got him to try an experiment. They tried to keep daily contact by thought transference, with each keeping a diary of occurrences where they believed they'd transferred thoughts. When Wilkins returned from the Arctic, they compared notes and discovered striking evidence of telepathy. In fact, their records became the first complete series of scientifically controlled telepathic experiments to be published. And even though they didn't continue this experiment officially after this instance, the men realized that they had a mental connection they couldn't explain that continued on past the experiment, if you can believe that. Wilkins said in 1942, quote, "Why only today I received this letter here in Lewiston from Sherman. In it, he answers several questions which I have had in mind to ask him for some time, but which I had not yet written to him." What does this all mean? We know the Nautilus submarine indeed existed and that Sir Wilkins owned her. Financed by wealthy friends and equipped with a fully working lab and crew, she set off in 1931. The Nautilus encountered some problems along the way, but Wilkins showed the world that submarines could operate beneath the polar ice cap, which was pretty novel. So was this rumor of telepathy experiments aboard the Nautilus a rumor? It first set sail 6 years before Wilkins allegedly ever tried a telepathy experiment with Sherman. But maybe it's more like a case of historical telephone, where the original story was in there somewhere and the submarine telepathy experiments really were conducted secretly by the US, maybe on another sub or at another time. But one fact is clear. Wilkins conducted telepathy experiments, and he owned the Nautilus. Just like the plant telepathy experiments from Cleve Backster or the rabbit experiments from the Soviets, distance seemed not to be a factor with human telepathy in this case either. Now, what's totally amazing, if that isn't amazing enough, is that Sherman claimed anyone can use telepathy. They just need to completely relax the physical body, have a calm mind, and fix their attention on the individual they wanted to transmit thoughts to or receive thoughts from. The hardest part, Wilkins said, was making the mind receptive. But wait, is there truth to that? Well, some evidence does show that it's easier to have telepathic experiences with people you like or are familiar with. There are lots of documented instances of sibling telepathy and twin telepathy, for example. There's also evidence in the classroom. The book Psychic Children by Samuel H. Young documented cases of ESP in children. He wrote that students tended to demonstrate the highest degree of ESP when a test was administered by a familiar homeroom teacher rather than by a stranger, or by a teacher well liked by the students rather than one less popular. In fact, when a teacher and students have a warm, fluid relationship, teaching material that's peripheral to what's actually being discussed is sometimes picked up telepathically by the students. In other words, if a teacher is well-versed in a subject and has good rapport with the students, she may unconsciously convey to the class some additional telepathic information that helps them understand more than just what she's verbally explaining. What the heck? I'll give you another case of telepathy being easier with those close or familiar to you, where a baby still in her mother's womb showed evidence of telepathy. When the father was up late into the night working on different nights just before she was born, the mother always knew when he was done with work and going to come to bed because the baby would start kicking like crazy. Sometimes there would be a 10-minute time gap between when the father first made the decision to come to bed and when he actually made any movements to do it. But the baby would be alerting the mother the entire time, like she knew his thoughts from 2 floors away. How does that work? Is it just a coincidence? How about some proof from a hospital setting? The Daily Post reported in 1974 on a British doctor in charge of a home for unmarried mothers during World War II. During that time, the mothers had 2 weeks while they were in the hospital to decide if they would give up their babies for adoption or keep them. Without exception, the doctor knew what the decision was before each mother told her. She explained, "I had only to look at the feeding charts as I made my morning rounds. Every rejected baby refused to suckle." Because she was always right, she looked for a medical, physical solution and put it down to a change in the taste of the milk, caused perhaps by the mothers being upset. But she never could understand why the bottle-fed babies reacted in exactly the same way. She brushed it off as a coincidence, but given the information about baby rabbits and their mothers, and the case of the baby in the womb picking up on her father's thoughts, it seems that baby humans are indeed in mental contact with their parents. Maybe these things happen in another dimension. Maybe they're just beyond what humans recognize as possible. So it seems easier to have telepathic communication with those you like or are familiar with. Could that explain some of the inconsistent telepathic studies where subjects who liked the agents giving them a telepathy test had significantly different results from experimenters who were not well liked? Or how about testing sessions where a skeptical observer is present? The results don't tend to prove evidence of ESP, but when the observer is open to ESP being real, the results are higher than chance. In these cases, the subjects didn't know the observer's beliefs. Of course, these are all natural kinds of telepathy where it's easy to do with someone you like a parent or a favorite teacher. But what about when you're trying to do telepathy across an ocean at a military target and you don't know them? That's more difficult, but it can be trained. And that's what the governments of the world were pursuing in order to use it for wartime applications. If telepathy is real, why haven't we heard about it? That's a common argument. In 1985, Dr. Russell Targ, a laser physicist at Stanford Research Institute, who conducted numerous experiments on remote viewing, said, quote, "The reasons more people have not actively explored their psychic capabilities are clear. Everywhere we look, we find images of psychic functioning that are confusing, intimidating, misleading, and terrifying. Meanwhile, critics of parapsychology, who often know next to nothing about this phenomena, condemn the scientific work in this field out of fear of its philosophical implication." In the United States, there were rumors about the Nautilus conducting telepathy experiments. But there were also reports claiming that in 1952, the US Navy was the first armed service to look into employing psychics to locate Soviet submarines. We all know the US and the Soviet Union were in competition with each other to be the dominant powers on the planet. Cold War. But you might not know how seriously the military was taking the threat. Around 1984, U.S. Army Medical Service Corps Captain Richard Groller was alarmed about foreign progress in telepathy, remote viewing, and remote influencing. He said, quote, "In time, the Soviets may be able to learn the contents of top secret documents, trace the movements of our troops and ships, and know the location and nature of our military installations. Additionally, the Soviets may be able to mold the thoughts of key U.S. military and civilian leaders from a distance, cause the instant death of any U.S. Army official at a distance, and disable U.S. military equipment of all types, including spacecraft," unquote. But I mean, come on, wasn't he just being dramatic? Where's the hard evidence? Well, I'll tell you what I found. In 1975 and 1976, the US Embassy in Moscow was mysteriously bombarded with microwaves. Some thought it was to make it hard to detect planted Soviet listening devices, or that the Soviets were trying to jam the Americans' electronic eavesdropping equipment in the embassy. But there's another story that's less well known. A U.S. Army captain in 1992 wrote a thesis on remote viewing and the parapsychological potential for intelligence collection. In his research, he'd read a book by the journalist Martin Ebon, who reported that the Soviets were using this radiation to affect mind changes in embassy personnel by tuning microwaves to the level of brainwaves and recording feedback activity in the form of emotions, images, and thoughts. What did that do to people? Ebon claimed that the potential of microwave brain manipulation stretches the farthest reaches of our imagination, and that President Carter might have been subjected to some form of esoteric mind manipulation during the Vienna SALT II talks in 1979. It was noted by the majority of the White House staff that when President Carter returned to Washington after Vienna, he appeared mired by indecision and demonstrated erratic personality and behavior swings. This change in the president's character prompted, get this, the resignation of 34 of his cabinet and staff members. According to Ted Stevens, an Alaskan Republican, quote, "Some of us are seriously worried that he might be approaching some sort of mental problem," unquote. Now, could the reports about President Carter at the time have been politically motivated? I mean, sure, anything's possible in politics, but here's where the possibilities are interesting. In the 1930s, a Soviet researcher named L.L. Vasilyev had been tasked with uncovering the mysticism associated with telepathy. His findings weren't published until early 1960. The same year, he formed a group to study telepathy at Leningrad University. Well, in Vasilyev's work, he found that very low-level radiation could affect living organisms by causing dizziness, emotional instability, and hallucinations. That sounds just like the reports of President Carter at the time. Vasilyev suggested that thoughts could be grafted into microwaves in the same way television signals carry pictures and sound, opening the possibility of long-distance hypnosis or mind control. Think that sounds ridiculous? In the thesis from the U.S. Army captain on the CIA's website that told these stories about President Carter and Vasilyev, a huge black block of text was redacted immediately after that part, plus the entire following page, plus another block at the top of the next page. What was under the redactions? If the story before it weren't leading up to something big and interesting, why would they redact so much info after? Now you might be asking me, Rob, what do you think? It's pretty clear here that there's something more to our human connection than just mere physical relationships. If anything, the examples here prove that. When you start tracking back the progress of some of these black projects, including but not limited to things like MK Ultra mind control programs and the development of parapsychological research, many things start to appear somewhat differently through the lens of this history. We were right in the middle of the Cold War, and we know for a fact the Soviets were experimenting and developing technology and techniques to interfere with America. War isn't always a battle. Sometimes it's just creating political instability. I mean, guys, just think about the implications and the timing of the scenario here with President Carter. How does a guy go from being completely rational and competent to losing 30+ members of his staff and being accused of having a mental disorder? What gives? What makes this story even more engaging is that we know President Carter was fully aware of the US experimentations with remote viewing and may have even been overseeing some of that himself. Carter's team once used remote viewing to locate a downed plane in Africa that could not be found via satellites or any other intelligence. Soviet interference was also a thing, and the technology back then may have been enough to interfere severely with the White House. If they were capable of that then, what are they capable of today? It sounds scary. I mean, it does. But just remember, if plants and children are fully capable of accepting telepathic hits from everyone around them, how about you? Maybe the powers of the world are going to try to manipulate these abilities for war. But for us, why can't we lean into them and change the world for good? Our entire environment might change around us with a single thought. But what do you think? Have you ever experienced telepathy or done something impossible you shouldn't be able to do? Let me know in the comments because your stories are amazing. They keep us going. If you like this episode and you want more, please consider supporting my work by pledging on our website, themetaphysical.tv. With your help, I can make more videos, more merch, which I designed myself, and also more exclusive episodes, like the hardest things to remote view. What is the observer effect? What happened to scientists who dared to talk about anti-gravity? And a special director's cut of Nikola Tesla made a death ray and the government stole it. You can also get a bag of delicious metaphysical coffee every month if you want your mornings to be interstellar. Just remember to like and subscribe to help the channel grow as well. And if you want to hear longer conversational episodes right on YouTube, our Metaphysical podcast has you covered. With that, I hope you thought this episode was out of this world.